So my testimony or my story of how I came to Jesus is quite long and complicated, but I'll kind of concise it or make it short. I grew up going to a pretty mainstream, kind of mainline church, but didn't really understand that I could have a personal relationship with Jesus. I remember one time having an experience where I had just this moment with Jesus. I remember at this church and was crying, but didn't really understand what that meant. And one day I was in university, and someone I knew had invited me to a church, and I was interested in going. She'd mentioned that there were a lot of young people that attend this specific church, so I went and visited and really fell in love with the atmosphere and thought it was encouraging to see other young people worshiping Jesus, something I had never seen before. I'd grown up in a church that was had a very older membership, and so got excited, started going to that church, and later found out that it was a cult, really. It was an organized group where they thought that they were the only way. They thought that they were the only way to Jesus, and that's really what makes a cult. A cult, by definition, is a group that tries to sway you or convince you that their way is the only way, and kind of controls the way that you think, controls who you interact with. And one example of that is they had rules that if a girl was asked out by a guy in that church, that they were supposed to say yes, they could not say no. And so they would ask people to write down a list of their sins and things like that. But I was so caught up in this church and just caught up with the relationship of having young people that were interested in the same thing I was, that I got really tied up in it and was a part of it for quite a while, until my parents found out that something just seemed a little off, and went to a school counselor who showed me a couple of articles about this organization and was totally against it, because I'd been told by this organization that what people thought, and that they had this reputation of being a cult, but they were very adamant that they were not. But it was one Sunday. My dad wasn't an avid churchgoer. He would go on special occasions like Christmas or Easter. And so he had to take us to church. They were adamant to try to get me out of this organized cult. They would take me to this church that they knew of. And my mom was working that Sunday, and she usually is the one that would take me and my brothers to church, so it was up to my dad that Sunday. So we went to this new Pentecostal church called Church of God of Prophecy that was on Pape Avenue, and we walked in, and I kind of sat there with my arms folded, very tough, very resilient, because I knew that this was not the place I was supposed to be, or I felt this was not the place I was supposed to be. And that Sunday, my dad, who was a heavy smoker and heavy drinker, gave his life to the Lord. And that Sunday totally eradicated smoking and drinking from his life instantly. He will attribute that to the Holy Spirit. And he said that he remembers trying to put up a cigarette to his mouth and just tasting the bitterness of it. Couldn't taste it anymore. He remembers trying to drink some alcohol at one point and couldn't even stomach that taste either. So we know it was the Holy Spirit. But that Sunday went by, and I kind of rolled my eyes and was kind of interested in the fact that my dad had made that transition, but didn't really know what that meant. But later on that week, I got a package in the mail, and it was a number of articles written about this particular church organization that I had found myself linked to at school. And I started to cry in my room, because I realized that I had been a part of an organization that was persuasive, that was changing their views, and was not a Christ-following church, to be exact. And so ended up still going to this new church that we found that my dad had given his life to. My mom started going, and soon after, probably I would say 5 or 6 months later, my whole family ended up giving our lives to the Lord, and we all actually got baptized on the same night, which was an Easter weekend. So that was an exciting moment in our lives, and that's the story of how I came to Jesus.